Hello, you're watching the TelecomTV Summit on Network Automation and our panel discussion on orchestration evolution and the promise of network as a service. I'm Guy Daniels, Director of Content, and apologies for any coughs and sneezes as my cold isn't getting any better. Now, just like yesterday, we have a slight change to our usual format. Both our panel discussion and the audience Q&A are live, so we really want your input. Please send us any questions, thoughts, or observations you have, but don't wait too long. The show is only going to last for 1 hour. Now we're going to start with a short discussion with our guests, and then we'll turn our attention to your questions. But before we do, let's quickly set the scene. And joining me for this live show is, as always, the fit and healthy Ray Maistre, editorial director here at TelecomTV. Now, Ray, we're looking to bring together the complex issues around orchestration with the increasingly popular model of telco network as a service. How do they connect?
Hi, Guy. Yes, well, I'm finding that a glass of apple cider a day is keeping the doctor away, as well as keeping me in high spirits, so all good here. But that's enough about digestion. Let's look at automation and orchestration, which of course are both also closely linked to virtualization and to a certain extent disaggregation, in this case of the IT applications and the network elements. And once you have all of that in place, then network as a service becomes a possibility. Now, that wasn't easy for me to say, and it's even harder for the service providers to do, which is why we're talking about it and have all of these great experts on today's show. So time for me to sip a bit more apple juice and let you get on with the show.
Thanks, Ray. Well, I've got my lemon and honey close by. And Ray, you're going to be sorting through the audience questions for us.
Yes, that's right. I knew there was an actual reason for me being here. That's right, Guy. I'm going to be monitoring the questions we're getting in from today's audience and sorting the wheat from the chaff, as they say in rural areas. So please submit your questions about orchestration, network as a service, automation, anything that's relevant to our summit using the Q&A forum on the website. And we'll select the best of the bunch and put them to our guests later in the show.
Thanks, Ray. And we'll see you again a little later, hopefully with some interesting questions from our live audience. Now, while Ray looks through your questions, let's meet our guests for our bumper panel today. And joining us live on the programme are Neil McRae, Chief Architect and MD Architecture and Strategy at BT Group, Chris Voudouris, Chief Technology and Information Officer for NEOS Networks, Johanne Meyer, Founder and Director of NaaS Compass, Sebastian Thalanany, Technologist, Advisor and Author with UScellular, and Diego Lopez, Senior Technology Expert at Telefónica. Hello everyone, really good to see you all. Thanks so much for taking part in our live show today. Now, first of all, I'd like to ask, what is today's approach to orchestrating all the various hardware and software elements required for network automation, and how can this be improved? Are there areas that need more development and attention? Neil, let me come to you for your thoughts first, because I'm sure pretty much all of our guests would like to answer this one.
I think there's a couple of different approaches, Guy. And what we're focused on is a network as a service. There's certain key components that you need to be able to orchestrate in the network. And what we've done, and we've talked about this before, is we work with open config models, and we use open config to do that orchestration. The great thing about that is open config is not specifically tied to any vendor, which means if I want to create a service on one platform or a different platform, I can use the same solution to do that. It's leveraging netconf, it's leveraging Yang, and effectively the orchestration is either running the whole network components, or it could be a kind of further up orchestrator in BSS that's calling upon the network to create something, and using those models. And the models are hierarchical as well as vertical. You can very quickly build a set of network capabilities and expose them to the users. And then as you're doing that, the exposure will create streaming telemetry and other network management, so that the whole overall service is the orchestrator knows the service is there, it's provisioned, and it's working as it should. Then when it comes to, perhaps virtualized drive services, again, we can still use netconf and yang and models, but typically we're using APIs, again, with streaming telemetry to know that the service is there and it's working and it's doing what it needs to do. But actually, there's other ways of calling things to happen in the network by exposing things even to something like radius or diameter. There's quite a few different choices depending on the network capability that you want. Or in many cases, and as we've done, is we kind of create our own way of doing it that we think works for the application, and then we'll try and take it to standardization. So we've taken a lot of the things that we've developed and taken them into TM Forum and tried to make them the standard that everyone else uses. Now, I strongly believe that's the best way of standardization, is actually to take something that works and works well, and then share it with the community. So, again, we're using Blue Planet as our orchestrator in BT, and we're using it again in a hierarchical way. We're using it in the BSS layer, and we're also using it in the network layer, together with a tool called Anuta that then drives out that orchestration into the network, and then feeds back to the higher layers that the service is ready and can be utilized. And we expose those APIs to customers if they want them. But pretty much most of our customers at this point in time are using a kind of a front end that then talks to our own APIs.
Thanks, Neil. Great insights there. Appreciate that. Johanne, let me come across to you, for your views on the current state.
Actually, I would say that Neil has a good description, but I think one of the things that he has missed on explaining is that network as a service, as we've created, and I'm leading the work at the TM Forum in trying to standardize network as a service, is actually where you're sending your abstraction. So you have your network, and your network domains are then exposing these services, and then what you're trying to do is remove all of the knowledge from the BSS about how a service is being composed. And so you have actually to change your processes. There is nothing really wrong with the orchestration platforms that we have. It's more the processes and how people are doing it today. If we're doing a network as a service, you're going to be exposing stuff, abstracting, hiding the how you're doing things from your network domain. And then any one of your favorite orchestrator platform can probably do that. So it's more a change, not a change in a platform or orchestration platform that you need, but it's actually a change in your processes and how you do things, and hiding the knowledge of your network from your BSS, so that you can add suppliers, you can change suppliers, you can do anything you want in your network, because you're just sending an abstracted service of that particular network that you have, or network capabilities, application. Just take firewall as a service. You're exposing firewall as a service, which can then create a product for managed firewall service or a business security service, and so on. But that piece of service, that atomic service, we're not saying how it's going to get created. So if you want to have it with this supplier, and then since 6 months later creating with another supplier, then it's done really easily. Whereas today, every single product is tied to a service. That service is tied to a resource. And then that resources, if you want to change it, then you have to create another product for it. And so changing things or adding things in the network is really complex if you tie that to your IT systems. And so I think that it's not an orchestration problem. It's actually more of a changing ways of doing things. But it's not easy, and that's why it hasn't been that popular so far.
Thanks, Johanne. So a call there for more focus on processes. Diego, let me come across to you for your views as the state of the play, and and what needs changing, if anything.
Well, I think Neil has portrayed it quite well, and I think Johanne has made an emphasis in something that is important when it comes to the processes. I would go for the need of something that I believe is sort of I don't know if it's an ontological or conceptual way of thinking. One of the problems that we have right now is when we want to achieve integration, when we have to achieve composition of different elements. Right now, the solutions that we have are naturally, well, in the terms we tend to think, are naturally hierarchical. And the idea at the end is that we tend to put one layer on top of another layer, and we're assuming that, for example, with the advent of SDN, we had a controller controlling everything. Then we have an orchestrator that were controlling, that were somehow on top of the controller. Then we have started to talk about higher level end-to-end orchestrators that are controlling everything. I believe that to achieve this, we have to change this purely hierarchical way for more flexible ways of addressing the two aspects that are crucial here, that are, on the one hand, abstraction, on the other hand, composition.
Great. Thanks very much for those additions, Diego. And let's go across to Chris for Chris's insights as well.
Yeah, I think most of the talkers are on similar journeys, some a bit further ahead, some sort of catching up as well. I think a lot of the effort is sort of focusing on orchestrating different domains, and obviously within each domain, you look to move away from command-line interfaces into more SDN controllers, into orchestrating across the network, and then obviously at the higher level of orchestrating for the services. I would say it's important to focus on your, if you like, the areas where you get the most business benefit or the most business outcome, be it like layer 2 services, or it could be like, let's say, optical orchestration. So there's a prioritization there to be done. On that side, I would say it's important to look also on the inventory side, have your data layer, your data fabric in place. So network orchestration, if you like, can sort of work on a good set of data. Last but not least, some of our effort here in NaaS, we're also looking, across, if you like, BSS and OSS layer, how we can orchestrate not only the network, orchestrate the services, move on more onto standardized APIs from telemanagement forum, and then, if you like, gradually try to expose these APIs also to the ecosystem, so we get closer to network as a service type of vision and strategy.
Great, thanks very much, Chris, and thanks for articulating the role of APIs there in this journey we are on as we move towards NaaS. Sebastian, did you want to add anything to this question on the state of play, or anything that needs to be changed?
Yes, so I sort of would like to complement the ideas from the former speakers, and that is that when we transition from 4G to 5G, basically underlying what are the motivators and moving to a virtualized service-oriented paradigm created new challenges, but at the same time provided much more granularity, flexibility, disaggregation to be able to go across heterogeneous domains in terms of allocating computing, networking, and storage resources in a manner that's more fluid. And of course, the foundational enabler for that is network slicing. And we talk about not just core network slicing, but across the board, across core radio transport devices, to be able to allocate in a manner that's on demand, and also to be able to move certain functions in a portable manner, which is what essentially cloud native renders through containers and microservices that allow the orchestrator to work in conjunction with service assurance to meet certain SLAs and on-demand services, especially as new verticals with highly demanding KPIs that have to adapt while at the same time sustaining the end-to-end system performance. And that leads to the next segue, which is, okay, so we've got all these capabilities that are absolutely needed to render some of the 5G advanced and beyond services, which then means that we need to address complexity. And that's where the concept of intelligent orchestration comes into play with multiple layers that also include the knowledge plane, the monitoring, analysis, and decision making, which is actually embedded throughout the system. And in terms of like an autonomous system, which has cognition, much like the human nervous system. So it changes the approach we take, while the fundamental principles of orchestration put on a new costume.
Thanks for those additional insights, Sebastian. Much appreciated. Neil, before we move on to our next question, you started this round, so let's pop back to you quickly for some extra reaction there.
I think the fact that we've had such varied answers in different areas shows how complex this topic is. I think the one thing that does scare me, though, is over-standardization. Hey, network as a service is standardized, and we've abstracted it. So how do we differentiate? And I think we need to be careful about that, because we've standardized so many things. One platform is much the same as another. We end up in commodity land, and hey, look at the market here in Europe right now, because we standardize everything the same way. So I just think that we need to kind of have, how do we inject innovation into this space? And that's where the driver for the configuration models that we're using is all about that innovation, because you can build on them and use your own models, leverage them with open config, but actually be able to add value to your service that's different from just what everyone else is doing from a standards point of view. Not to say that we don't need standards, it's just how do we inject some innovation back into that cycle?
Yeah, thanks very much, Neil. You're right. It's that balance between standards and still allowing innovation to come through, which is so critically important. Let's move on, because I would like to talk a little bit more about network as a service. For telcos, what type of network as a service are we actually talking about? And Johanne, perhaps I could start by asking you this question, because we're already hearing the term telco NaaS, but what does this actually mean?
Well, actually, it's very interesting because it gets very confusing out there in the industry. When I started to work on promoting network as a service, when I was with Telstra, it was hardly heard. Nobody was talking about network as a service as such, and so we started the standardization. And the standardization, if you think about what Sebastian was talking about, so network slicing. Let's just say today we have no network as a service, which is the case in most places. Then if you want to do your network slice, you'll have to assemble, bits from the RAN, bits from the core, the wireless core, and then bits from the transport, and then you'll have your internet stuff. And you have to assemble all of this into a product. And then when you assemble this, then you have to create different types of slices for the different types of support or type of things you want to do. But then that means that you're creating a lot of duplications, whereas with network as a service, all we're saying is that we are exposing, so RAN is exposing their piece, the transport is exposing their piece, the core is exposing their piece, and how you reassemble that together can be different for different types of other services. So you can reuse that transport bit. You can reuse it for other types of services as well. We are changing the way we are doing things so that the service provider become more flexible, more agile in assembling and reassembling things. I mean, Neil seems to think that we were standardizing too much, but network as a service is actually not standardizing as much the definition as it is trying to help in creating, how we should expose these things from the different network domain, how each of the domains needs to manage things within its domain with the closed loop. So it's not just order to activate that isn't required, but as Sebastian also brought the fact, is we need to be able to do the closed loop within each domain so that these atomic pieces are more reliable. And then you'll have an end-to-end within the network domain, as opposed to being composed in the IT system, which doesn't give you the choice of doing an end-to-end closed loop. And so network as a service has quite a lot of benefits, but it's definitely not too rigid, because how you're doing it within a TV service or a transport domain or an IP service, we leave it up to the network domain to do that part. We're only sending an abstracted version of that. And then your IT systems don't need now to try to reassemble things. We're reassembling things in the network. So we're really decoupling how we're doing things. So that's the NaaS that we are standardizing within the TM forum, which was also part of Etsy's ZSM. So they've adopted this architecture of network as a service. But there are definitely other NaaS out in the industry. ABR research basically said that there's a $17 billion market for enterprises. So service provider can sell network as a service. But that's certainly different than the network as a service we are working on in the TM forum. There's also the MEF last week in their conference. They were talking about, how they could standardize a secure NaaS for enterprises, reusing all of the different services they have created, carrier Ethernet, SD-WAN, and so on. But that NaaS will have to cannibalize something that service providers are already selling to the enterprise market. And it would be really interesting to know from the service provider, are the enterprises coming to the service provider and asking them, hey, I want a NaaS service? And if yes, then what is that NaaS service? And what is it that's going to cannibalize something else? Because I'm not sure that it's a bigger market is being generated. It's more of a replacement because it's a new words and new things to be advertised. And so they want to go to the new shiny thing.
Okay, Johanne, well, fascinating. Chris, I'm going to come to you to say whether or not this is an approach you see NaaS in the same way, or are you viewing network as a service slightly differently?
I think more or less the same way. I would say if you look at sort of who's the ultimate customer, if you look at large enterprise, some of the servcos that they haven't got their own network, the ones that are like virtual network operators, they're out there to want or be able to procure network as a service. So in terms of if you look at the domains involved, I mean, obviously you have the core, the aggregation layer, could be access. So if you are able to go out and get this network slice, right, from one place or two or three places, and you're able to chain it together, then, I mean, in the wholesale market, that represents wholesale NaaS, I would say. I mean, if you look at sort of the enterprise side and how they consume that, obviously you have more like the connectivity as a service. So they're looking at flexibility. They're looking at sort of the convergence between, SD-WAN, security, cloud connectivity. So that's from the end user point of view. Ultimately, you need a lot of capabilities around sort of APIs, workflows, this concept of marketplaces to realize both the NaaS and the sort of connectivity as a service aspects of that sort of ecosystem.
Great, thanks very much, Chris. And I think we've given our audience plenty of food for thought there. And I'd like to pause now. We've only got through 2 talking points, but I'd just like to pause because I want to bring Ray back in and see what our audience has got to say and what audience questions he has for you all. So welcome back, Ray. How are the questions coming along?
The questions are flowing in, Guy. So we had one a little bit earlier on, in fact, just before we went live. So I'm going to put this question, audience question, to our panel first. And the question is it really possible for a telco to run all of its workloads on cloud native storage in a microservices architecture and have them all fully orchestrated, or is this just an impossible dream? So that question again, because it's quite a sort of detailed one. Is it possible for a telco to run all of its workloads on cloud native storage in a microservices architecture and have them all fully orchestrated? So Neil, if we can come to you on this one first, does that sound like the end goal that that might be strived for but might never be attained, or is this the potential reality?
So cloud native storage is a big challenging topic right now, and I think a good question to ask, and one that, you know, in the infrastructure side, you know, there is some areas of challenge, actually, not just for telcos, but in the whole cloud native world. So many of us were at KubeCon last week, and we were learning about some of the challenges there that storage has specifically in the cloud native world. I go back to the key part of the question of workloads, telco workloads. So telcos are unique in that we have, you know, 3 or 4 different types of workloads. Some will fit that model really well. So billing or all the IT stuff, chuck all that over there. Life is good. When it comes to things like radius, authentication, mobility management, all the kind of 5G applications or mobile applications, absolutely we can run that with some changes. And that's part of those changes that we've done in 5G, which is decoupling the data plane with the control plane, so that we can manage the state in a much more a much more easier way, because cloud native tends to struggle with huge amounts of state. When I look at transport and routing, it's hard to see how cloud native or cloud native storage would play a part in that, for sure, and maybe in root servers or some of the management of the transport layer, there's a part for it to play. But overall, I think we're still going to see dedicated routers out there for probably the next 10 years, if not longer. So for sure, there is a huge amount that we can do there. And I think if we add TV onto that, we add voice, we add communication services, we add video on demand, you put all that into cloud native. In fact, all of BT Sport runs in a cloud native format. We've been doing that almost since 2015, 2016. And it's absolutely possible, but there are some challenges and some gotchas around how you architect that, and ensuring that, remember, cloud native is more than just, hey, it's running on Kubernetes. It's a whole ethos of vendor agnostic, being able to control it, being able to see what's happening, being able to restart, all the automation that aligns with it, the closed loop that was talked about earlier on. And cloud native storage has to work in that same way, and that starts to bring a number of challenging architectural issues. And but overall, having looked at ways of trying to run telco services more reliably and more availability and easier to operate, cloud native is definitely one of the big tools that's going to help operators in the future. Less so than what I call VNFs, because I think they're cumbersome and challenging. I think when we get to true cloud native, and we push out there that message, we'll really start to see this network as a service become a reality. And we've got BT, we've got about, I think, 8 million users now, might be slightly more or less than that, on our cloud native 5G core that our partner Ericsson's helping us build. And the difference in operations is just immense compared to what we had before. So it's definitely the right path. There's a huge amount of work to do. It's hard, it's complex, but it's an exciting technology move, and we're really thrilled to be driving it forward, because our customers are seeing that we don't have to take the network down when we do upgrades. Before, we used to have these big upgrade windows where we had to turn everything off and turn it back on again. We don't need to do that anymore. So, and there's a bunch of other benefits that I could talk for hours on, but yes, I think we can get a lot of stuff there. Every single workload, probably not.
Okay, interesting. But it's clear that there are benefits here in terms of the capabilities, agility, and also, once you get past those pain points, the management and operations of these capabilities and services. So that's an encouraging sign there. Chris, let's come to you. I mean, for a company like NEOS, how relevant is cloud native and trying to take everything into the microservices environment and then manage it in a different way?
I think it's quite meaningful. I would say going 100% cloud native probably doesn't make sense. I think I would start, first of all, with a cloud strategy. We are doing exercises like creating inventory of our workloads, looking at sort of what we have in the BSS side, OSS side. For some of the stuff, you just lift and shift. For some of the other stuff, you may be thinking, okay, I can re-engineer that. I'll build it in a cloud native sort of way. then you have to make a choice. Are you going to go hyperscaler native? Are you going to go more like agnostic with Kubernetes? And then you need to look at sort of the business outcomes and, is it saving money? Does it makes business sense, if you like? And I think you need to sort of do that inventory of workloads, workload by workload, sort of decide how you're going about it. I mean, we are all on a journey. Ultimately, we're going to see more stuff moving into cloud.
Okay, interesting. Thanks, Chris. And actually, your final comment there links to our next audience question. So heads up for our panelists. Our next question is related to cloud and which operators might be able to introduce network as a service into their domains. But the question after that relates to SD-WAN and its relationship with network and a service. But we'll come, the first question I want to put to you now from the audience is, can any network operator become a network as a service provider? Is this something that's possible for any network operator? And also, does it matter if that operator or if any operator is doing this from their own private cloud or a hybrid cloud or public cloud platform? So Diego, maybe we can come to you first. I mean, the whole evolution and move towards cloud native automation, surely this should open up the market so that maybe more companies, maybe specialist companies, maybe for enterprise services, can get involved? Or is this so tricky and requires so much resource that it's still quite something for a limited market?
Well, first of all, if we think about what is required for an operator to provide network as a service, I would say simply to be brave enough to attempt it. Basically, the point is that what you need is that you have to have a clear view of what you want to offer as a service, which is your a target service, and for sure be sure that you have underpinning this service that you're offering. You have the mechanisms to support those services in a cost-effective way. Whether this is cloud native or not, that's another story. I mean, you can provide network as a service as long as you have a network infrastructure and a set of network interfaces that are automated and software-based enough. Going into what kind of cloud, again, or what kind of uniform infrastructure or infrastructure that is suitable for automation, whether it's you can consider it a full-fledged cloud or something that is somehow hybrid. We were talking before about the limitations that are implied by things like, for example, the IP and routing mechanisms on the transport layer, for example. So in those cases, you need, as I said, you need something that is programmable, that is software-based, and on which you can make resource sharing and you can automate. We can call it a cloud, or we can call it an infrastructure that is cloud-like. For sure, it's simpler at the first stage. I would say it's simpler if we're talking about an end-to-end service, including the data plane, etc. Is way simpler if the infrastructure is your own. But for sure, in many cases, this is something that is not going to be more the case, and you can be reusing some resources for public cloud hyperledger providers, or even from other. You can be a reseller from other operator that is offering you a kind of network as a service that is less specialized. Why not? This is something that is currently happening in the IT world and can equally happen here, as long as we find the right abstractions and we have the company that is willing to provide this service is able to encapsulate, compose, and abstract the different elements that constitute the service that is willing to provide as a service to their customers.
So where there's a will and some resources, there's a way, by the sound of it. You just need the business case then, of course, as was mentioned before.
Yeah, sure.
Chris, if we can come to you, is this is network as a service and the kind of APIs we're seeing and the processes that are now becoming more popular and usable within the telecom industry, is this opening up the market? Can any network operator kind of get into this and start offering more enterprise services?
I think there's two levels, I would say. One is if you like your own network, and as well as whether you act as an aggregator of other networks. I think for the purpose of your own network, obviously, a lot of the work operators are doing around processes, around putting together sort of service orchestration capabilities. Standardized APIs now exist for some of these platforms. So I think you can start exposing that to your customers, to enterprise. So if you like, they can go into a more like easy consumption of your network capability. If you are also more on the aggregator side, obviously, then you rely in the ecosystem to provide components or parts of the service. That's where it gets more complicated. I think we need to work more across the industry so we can standardize more, the fulfillment journey, assurance journey, so we can connect across telecoms in an easier way to go and offer network as a service to our end customers.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Neil, we'll come to you next, and then Johanne.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're not trying to be a network as a service operator, irrespective of how you market and sell the services that you want, i.e., if you're running a kind of network, automation is crucial because, frankly, we're not making enough money, and the world is moving to a cloud on-demand model. So if you're not trying to automate the core layer of your network and expose things as a kind of API or as an abstracted method to provision, change, move, check, whatever the model you use is, then I think you're going to find yourself in real trouble. One, because customers are starting to demand it. They're not there yet, and especially SD-WAN. I think SD-WAN's been overall a disappointing service from a customer point of view. Certainly the feedback that we get was, they were kind of promised the world, and that didn't really materialize with the controllers being so tightly coupled to the end devices. And I think there's still more work to do there. But overall, customers are starting to look at, hey, I've got to do this special thing this weekend. I need connectivity. Who's the operator that can give me that connectivity to the cloud or to the event location that I'm in or wherever it happens to be? And I think if you can't offer that, you're going to lose out on business. But then there's the final part. So you heard our colleague from UScellular talking that they were talking about how did they generate network slicing and all the complexity of the network. Humans can no longer manage the network. I've said this before, I'll say that again, but humans can't manage the network, and automation is crucial. So network as a service is a great way of delivering that because it allows you to do other things, detangle from IT, as we've heard before, but also just have a platform that's fit for customer needs for the future.
Great points, Neil. And Johanne, you mentioned earlier that it's this approach to service provisioning and automation hasn't really caught on a great deal yet. Will it eventually? Are we going to see sort of this as a ubiquitous operating model?
I'm hoping it would. But I just wanted to come back to the confusion about network as a service and the term being used. The even telecom infrastructure project now has a whole document, 170 pages or so, for how to become a NaaS operator. Now, if you read their literature, then I think that they use the same literature for their mobile operator, because you'll have things like in the NaaS operator context, some strategic issues can be how to fund the NaaS operator initiative, what are the options to acquire the radio spectrum, and what does the organization look like, and things like that. So there's a lot of reference to mobile operations. But as I was saying, if you want to offer network as a service, for a service provider to offer a network as a service, to become a network as a service provider, then we will have to standardize of what that means. Because if you need an extension into another country, for example, and then how will you request for that extension, for that end leg, for that enterprise, without a standards to decide, what it is as you're ordering at the other end, it's going to be hard to deliver.
Okay, brilliant, thanks. And actually, some of the points you touched on there, and Neil as well, will come to in the next audience question. But at this point, I'm going to hand back over to Guy for a couple of minutes.
Yep, thanks very much, Ray, because it is time now to check in on our audience poll for our Network Automation Summit. We have 1 question and 7 answer options. And of course, you can pick whichever ones you feel are the most relevant. The question we have been asking this week is, which are the most important areas of focus for telco AI strategists during the next few years? And you can see the real-time votes right here on the screen. Now, each figure represents the percentage of people who voted for that particular option. So as we can see here, enabling network as a service functionality is currently topping the pile, but there's some interesting results there. If you have yet to vote, then please do so. The more votes, the better, because we're keeping the polls open until the end of the summit. So you've got a few more hours. Now we have another 15 minutes or so remaining, so there's still time for a couple more questions, hopefully. But first, Ray, what do you make of the poll results we've had so far?
They've moved a little bit from yesterday, but so we've still got enabling network as a service capabilities at the top. But what I think is interesting as well is that, because it's all about where sort of that AI specialist should be focusing. At the bottom of the pile there is enabling automated customer care functionality, which, maybe it's already been done, maybe it's already perfect, but I'll be interested to see if any of our panelists here have any comments on those, on the poll results, any surprises there. Enabling automation in the radio access network to reduce energy consumption was also pretty high. Any big surprises? Any comments on any of the outcome of the poll there?
So I'm not surprised at all, because while it says network as a service, but that actually has a lot of back-end implications, meaning that to accomplish that in a highly disaggregated, distributed, multi-domain environment, which includes the radio access as well, which adds the element of uncertainty, there needs to be a way to collaborate while offering services that may be available in one domain, but it's not available in another, and hence also result in business model innovation, deployment strategies, and so forth. So I think this the autonomic principles hinging on AI and machine learning with numerous models, specifically Q-learning and reinforcement learning, those are going to be quite widely applied in order to accomplish the objective and the vision of network as a service, because the complexity to actually provide the functionality in a virtualized environment to use cases that have yet to be designed or innovation is continuing. So, which means that there should be an agile, continuous evolution of the network as a service, which, as Neil also mentioned, the only way to handle that is because the response limits are beyond any kind of human intervention, which means that there has to be an autonomous system with self-organizing capabilities, self-configuring, self-provisioning, healing, protecting, and so forth. So it is a challenging problem, but I think it is solvable over time, depending on different business models and migration strategies. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. And of course, reskilling and changing the way that operations teams work on a day-to-day basis. Okay, thanks very much. Let's come to our next audience question. This does link back to a couple of the comments already made by our panelists. And the question is, could the panel comment on how SD-WAN relates to network as a service? Are we talking here about internal operator issues, so provisioning, configuring, and enabling services, or how it gets sold to the punters? Is this SD-WAN on tap, as it were, as a service? I guess like a cloud service, can you turn it on? Can you turn it off? Not that you'd want to, but I guess that's the question here. So anybody want to address this a little bit more? Neil, you mentioned SD-WAN just a little bit as a bit of a disappointment, which I think would clearly come to as perhaps a surprise from some of the companies in the industry, but maybe not a surprise to enterprises out there who've been using these services. But is there a better way to enable SD-WAN services? And with network as a service, are we simply just talking about the internal process of being able to set these kind of services up?
Yeah, I mean, I think SD-WAN, whilst it's been an interesting, I'd probably call it experiment, I think it's missed the mark. And I think a lot because of what we've all been talking about here. SD-WAN does not have the kind of abstraction or network as a service capability that you need to really make the promise of SD-WAN come true, which was all about lowering costs, all about which it has done, although it hasn't really for carriers. So customers have got a much better deal for sure, and that's good for them. But for us as operators, actually the underlying technology hasn't brought a huge amount of benefit for us. There's the coupling between the platforms and the controllers are unbelievably tight, which means you if you want to upgrade stuff or change stuff, that you've got to think about how you do that with the controller first, then the endpoint devices. I think overall, SD-WAN was promised many of the things that network as a service promised, but hasn't really delivered them. And I think I see SD-WAN evolving into being a solution that's delivered via network as a service, and certainly that's what we have in BT right now for our cloud access products and our GMV platform. So in my mind, SD-WAN's almost like the step before. It's the step after MPLS, but it's the step before true network as a service. And actually, I kind of wish that we'd kind of jumped to network as a service more than spend a lot of time trying to make SD-WAN working. Most customers that are using SD-WAN, they're happy with it, but I don't think it's delivered on the real agility that they promised. And I think it's tied them down into certain platforms more than they would have liked as well.
Okay, interesting. Diego, let's come to you. I mean, how do you see this? How's it work for Telefónica?
Yeah, no, precisely. I would like to basically agree when I was thinking about what Neil was saying. Is what I had in mind is precisely the lack or the low level of the abstraction. Somehow, if you think about it, it's a little bit like traditional MPLS or whatever. If we go for a mapping on what is now a programming computer, MPLS and the like are like using machine code. SD-WAN could be like an assembler that is not so far away from the machine code and is very tight, very much tied to the particular processor you're running. And so it's quite limited. It's more powerful than dealing with the base technology itself, and it's comfortable for a customer, but it requires a very deep knowledge of the how the network is built, and limits very much the level of abstraction. It's a first step, but what we are thinking what we have in mind when talking and thinking about the network as a service is something that has a higher level of abstraction and is not so much tied to the particular technology and a particular architecture.
Sebastian, yes. Did you want to come in on this as well?
Yes, I just wanted to complement what Diego just mentioned about MPLS. one of the things is that, especially in IETF as of last year, SRv6, which is segmented routing, that is very forward-looking in terms of programmability of the bearer plane, and it has much lower overhead relative to MPLS, and it also can interface at the upper layer in terms of abstractions for the application layer. So just wanted to add that. Thanks.
Thank you, Sebastian. Looking at the clock in the corner of our studio, I think we've got time to get one more question in. And the next question we have from one of our audience, viewers, is for the CSPs on the panel, the operators. And the question is, what is the experience of the CSPs on actually leveraging network as a service capabilities? But, actually, it's a question for the CSPs. And Johanne, you started your work at Telstra on this, and you're following this very closely. So maybe we can start with you. What is the experience so far? Maybe what is the hold up of this becoming more widespread?
Actually, it was very interesting because just a few weeks ago, I was in Copenhagen speaking with Mark Sanders from Telstra, where he was saying that it has been adopted. I mean, it's not easy to convert the network engineering to think in that way, right? They're used to talking to the order to activation group, the assurance group from IT, and then the billing group from IT, and so on. And they're all in silos, and they all just deal with their little bit, right? In terms of thinking about network as a service, that becomes a lot more complex, and it's been different. But the journey has proven so successful from Telstra that Mark was telling us that they are now not only doing the network capabilities, but they're now going to offer data as a service, and they're going to move into IT as a service. And they're going into that same model of having APIs and then offering things, and not just internally, not just to their IT system, but actually towards their partners, towards their customers and things like that. So I think for the customer service providers who actually make the jump, it's actually been very beneficial.
Okay, fantastic. And I got the sense from you, Neil, earlier that the experience you've had in the past few years with BT Sport and now with your 5G core, this has been a great learning experience for BT, and something that you'll be able to take into other areas of the organization. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think there's network as a service, and that's definitely an important direction. But I think there's a whole lot of other automation activities that are happening, and the enablers to enable network as a service. And actually, I might have been a bit unfair to SD-WAN. Actually, some of the things SD-WAN helped us with was actually make some of these low level boxes actually get the throughput that we need, which wasn't there before. So it has given us some things, but there's so many things that we need to automate in the network, from all facets, and some of those we expose and pass to customers either through our IT platform or directly. Some of them we leverage ourselves. So we create services with other service providers all over the world. BT's in 144 countries, delivering services to the biggest telco users in the world. And to create some of those services, we're using network as a service concepts. These tend to start fairly simplistic, Ethernet access, but they're now starting to get a lot more complex with things like maintenance and being able to add devices or upgrade devices and things like that in ways that we probably never thought. And one of the things that's interesting from my point of view is different parts of the world are coming at it with slightly different focuses depending on their own local marketplace, which has given us a lot of interest and ideas for how we deploy that into our global network. Then being able to add security, intrusion detection, a whole bunch of other services on top of it that integrate with our platform that we expose to customers, I think is quite exciting, and ultimately for the customers, go back to that agility word, is giving them the agility that they thought they might get with SD-WAN, but haven't quite got there. So the future looks bright on this, but I think it's more than just about network as a service. I think it's about all the things that we're doing in the network and making sure that we're automating them in the right way, in the most manageable way and scalable way for the future, so that next step, I say this often, but we haven't innovated since the smartphone came out. How do we take the network beyond the smartphone into the use cases, into the parts of the world where network as a service and automation is a must-have? I'm talking about life-threatening situation, health and safety. I'm talking about running factories and plants. I'm talking about using video as a service to create new manufacturing capabilities that can only be powered from the network and can only be done if we drive that right automation in the network. And it's down to us if we get stuck. There are some companies I hear where they've got engineers that aren't into this. Here at BT, we've been developing our teams in this to really be ready for this next type of technology. So 176 years of us being around, we're really taking our engineers on that journey so they're ready to create these services in that new way. And actually, if there's anything that's in the way, it's us as leaders being a bit overly risk averse is one of the big challenges for us.
Well, that kind of swings very neatly back to, I think, to what Johanne was saying at the beginning of the show, that it's as much or more about process than anything else. And it's very clear, if we had been having this summit 3 years ago or 4 years ago, it would probably have been in person and we wouldn't have been able to do what we're doing now. But we wouldn't have been talking about these kind of advances and capabilities, and enterprises wouldn't be where they are today in terms of the kind of services they can get from CSPs. So there's no doubt that significant advances have been made for sure. Okay, well, I'm getting a buzz in my ear from our virtual producer that says I need to hand back over to Guy at this point. So over to you, Guy.
Yeah, thanks very much, Ray. Yeah, we are out of time. Thank you so much to all of our guests who joined us for this live program, and of course to our audience for sending in their questions. And sorry, we didn't have time to get through all of them.
Yep, that is the end of day 2, and indeed the end of this year's Network Automation Summit. Guy and I will be back with you in exactly 2 weeks' time for our very first Open Telco Infra Summit.
We do love a new summit, and we've got some fascinating panels lined up along with some terrific interviews with CSPs. So please join us again on Wednesday, the 16th of November for the Open Telco Infra Summit. For now, though, thank you for watching and goodbye.